The morning sun lit the Montana forest in golden hues, the crisp air hinting at autumn. Mark Anderson, a seasoned wildlife photographer, adjusted his camera strap as he moved through familiar trails. But today, the usual sounds of the forest were absent, replaced by an unsettling stillness. A faint whimper broke the silence, pulling Mark off the path. He followed it carefully, each step filled with apprehension. In a clearing, he froze. A young black bear cub lay injured, its dark fur matted with blood, one hind leg twisted from an apparent mountain lion attack. The cub's shallow breaths and dull, fear-filled eyes told a story of pain and desperation. Strangely, there was no sign of its mother, an unusual and troubling absence. Mark's instincts told him to observe, not intervene. Nature had its course, and interfering was against every protocol he followed. Yet as he saw the cub struggling even to lift its head, those rules felt harder to uphold. The nearest wildlife clinic was 4 hours away, and his satellite phone had no signal. Time was running out. The cub's dehydration and injuries would make survival impossible without help. Mark knelt at a safe distance, weighing his options. At barely 20 pounds, the cub was light enough to carry, but even young bears could be dangerous. Helping the cub also risked serious legal consequences. Torn between duty and compassion, Mark faced a decision that could alter not only his career, but also the fate of the vulnerable cub before him. Yet as he watched the cub let out another weak whimper, something deeper than rules and regulations stirred in his heart. This wasn't about following protocol anymore. It was about making a choice between walking away and taking action. The cub's eyes met his, and in that moment, Mark saw beyond the wild animal to a living being in desperate need of help. With careful movements, he removed his expensive camera equipment from his backpack. The thousands of dollars worth of gear would have to stay hidden among the trees. He needed the space for more important things now. From his pack, he pulled out an emergency first aid kit and his water supplies. As he prepared for what would be the most challenging journey of his life, Mark's mind was clear. Some moments in life required breaking the rules, and this was one of them. The decision was made. He would carry this injured bear cub to help, no matter the personal cost. As the morning sun climbed higher in the sky, Mark began to prepare for a journey that would test his strength, endurance, and humanity in ways he never imagined. Mark worked quickly as the morning sun climbed higher in the sky. Every minute was precious, and he knew the next few hours would push him to his limits. His hands moved with purpose as he transformed his photography backpack into a survival kit. Energy bars, water bottles, and basic medical supplies would be essential for the journey ahead. With gentle movements, he approached the injured cub. The young bear watched him with wary eyes but was too weak to resist as Mark carefully examined its wounds. The leg injury was worse up close. Deep gashes ran along the cub's hind leg, still seeping blood. Using clean water from his bottle, Mark softly cleaned the wounds. The cub flinched but remained surprisingly still, as if understanding this strange human meant no harm. From his first aid kit, Mark pulled out antiseptic wipes and gauze. His wilderness training had taught him the basics of animal first aid, but treating a bear was entirely different. He worked methodically, cleaning the wounds as best he could and wrapping the leg with protective gauze. The bandaging would not hold for long, but it might help prevent further injury during the journey. The route to Hamilton would be challenging. Mark studied his topographical map, tracing possible paths with his finger. The direct route would take them through dense forest and over steep ridges. The longer, gentler path would add hours to their journey. Time was critical, but so was ensuring he could maintain his strength while carrying the cub. After careful consideration, he chose a middle path, one that balanced speed with safety. Mark removed his thick flannel shirt, leaving only a light t-shirt despite the cool morning air. The hike would warm him quickly enough. He fashioned the shirt into a makeshift sling, something to help distribute the bear's weight across his back and chest. The cub would need to be secure, but able to breathe comfortably during the long journey. Looking up at the sky, Mark assessed the weather. The morning's clear blue expanse was gradually filling with clouds. The forecast had mentioned possible afternoon showers, adding another layer of urgency to their journey. Wet conditions would make the forest paths treacherous, and keeping the cub's wounds dry would become even more challenging. He checked his watch. It was just past 8 in the morning. If everything went well, they might reach the veterinary clinic by early afternoon. But Mark knew from experience that in the wilderness, things rarely went exactly as planned. He would need to pace himself, conserve energy, and stay alert for any signs of danger. Before lifting the cub, Mark took a moment to center himself. The task ahead would demand every ounce of his physical and mental strength. He rolled his shoulders, stretched his legs, and took several deep breaths. The cool forest air filled his lungs, helping to calm his racing thoughts. The final step was the most crucial. Mark had to lift and secure the injured cub without causing it more pain or triggering its natural defensive instincts. He spoke in soft, soothing tones as he approached, letting the bear become familiar with his voice. With careful movements, he slipped the makeshift sling under the cub's body. The young bear whimpered but remained surprisingly cooperative, perhaps too weak to resist or somehow sensing Mark's intention to help. As Mark prepared to lift the cub, he said a silent prayer. The journey ahead would test them both, but there was no turning back now. Their survival would depend on each other, an unlikely partnership born of desperate circumstances. The first steps were the hardest. As Mark lifted the injured cub into the makeshift sling, its weight settled across his back and shoulders like a heavy backpack. The bear tensed but remained surprisingly calm, its labored breathing warm against Mark's neck. The morning forest stretched before them, a maze of trees and undergrowth that would test their resolve with each passing mile. Within the first 15 minutes, Mark discovered the true challenge of carrying a wild animal through wilderness terrain. Every step required careful balance. The cub's weight shifted unpredictably with each movement, forcing Mark to constantly adjust his stance. His muscles burned as he navigated around low-hanging branches and overfallen logs. The forest floor, covered in slick autumn leaves, demanded his complete attention to maintain secure footing. The cub's initial fear gradually subsided as they moved through the forest. Its tense body began to relax slightly, though Mark could feel its rapid heartbeat against his back. The trust building between them was subtle but unmistakable. When Mark had to pause to check his direction or take a drink of water, the young bear remained calm, occasionally making soft sounds that seemed almost questioning. After the first hour, sweat soaked through Mark's t-shirt despite the cool morning air. His shoulders ached from the constant strain, and his legs trembled slightly with each uphill climb. The forest terrain showed no mercy. Thick patches of underbrush forced him to take longer routes, and steep inclines left him breathing heavily. Yet Mark pressed on, knowing each step brought them closer to help. Navigation proved more challenging than expected. The dense canopy above made it difficult to maintain a consistent bearing using the sun. Mark had to stop frequently to check his map and compass, precious minutes ticking away with each pause. The longer route he had chosen provided easier terrain, but the winding path sometimes left him second-guessing his direction. The weather began to shift as the morning wore on. The clear sky gradually disappeared behind a blanket of gray clouds. The changing air pressure brought a stronger wind that rustled through the trees, carrying the distant scent of rain. Mark knew they needed to make significant progress before any storms arrived. Wet conditions would make their journey significantly more dangerous. Small victories marked their progress. Each time they crested a hill or crossed a particularly challenging stretch of terrain, Mark felt a surge of accomplishment. The cub seemed to sense these moments too, its breathing becoming calmer during their brief rests. During one such pause, Mark noticed the bear had begun making soft churring sounds, a noise he recognized from his wildlife studies as one cubs used to communicate with their mothers. The unlikely bond forming between them grew stronger with each passing mile. When Mark had to scramble over a fallen tree, the cub adjusted its position instinctively, making the awkward maneuver possible. These small moments of cooperation felt almost miraculous, as if the young bear understood their shared purpose in this journey. New obstacles emerged as they pressed forward. A section of their planned route was blocked by a recent rock slide, forcing them to detour through thicker forest. The alternative path led them through a series of steep switchbacks that tested Mark's endurance. Each step had to be carefully chosen, as a fall now would be disastrous for both of them. As they approached the end of their first hour, Mark faced the reality of their situation. His body was already showing signs of fatigue, and they had only covered a fraction of the distance to Hamilton. The cub's breathing had become more labored, and the makeshift bandage on its leg needed attention. Yet giving up was not an option. They had come too far, and the trust building between them felt too precious to abandon. The forest ahead seemed to stretch endlessly, but Mark's determination only grew stronger. Each step forward was a small victory, each mile a testament to the extraordinary connection between a human and a wild creature united by circumstance and survival. 3 hours into their journey, exhaustion began to take its toll on Mark's body. Every muscle screamed in protest with each step. His shoulders had gone numb from the constant weight, and his legs trembled from navigating the uneven forest terrain. The physical demands of carrying the injured cub pushed him to limits he never knew he possessed. The bear's condition worried him more with each passing hour. Though the cub remained remarkably calm, its breathing had become more shallow and irregular. The makeshift bandage on its leg was soaked through, and Mark could feel the animal's body temperature rising. During a brief rest, he used the last of his clean gauze to rebandage the wound. The cub watched him with eyes that seemed to hold both trust and pain, stirring something deep in Mark's heart. A steep ravine blocked their path, forcing them to traverse along its edge to find a safe crossing. The detour cost them valuable time and energy. Mark's boots slipped on loose rocks, each near fall, sending jolts of panic through his body. The cub sensed his tension, pressing closer against his back in what felt almost like an attempt to help maintain balance. The connection between them had evolved beyond mere carrier and cargo. When Mark spoke softly to the cub during their brief rest stops, it responded with gentle movements and soft sounds. These moments of communication felt almost supernatural, as if their shared ordeal had broken down the natural barriers between human and wild animal. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and the wind carried the unmistakable scent of approaching rain. Mark knew they needed to find some form of shelter soon. The cub's wounds had to stay dry, and his own exhausted body would not handle while in slick conditions. Yet the forest offered little protection from the impending storm. As physical fatigue threatened to overwhelm him, Mark drew strength from an unexpected source. The trust the injured cub placed in him became his motivation. Each time he considered stopping, he felt the bear's heartbeat against his back, a reminder of the life depending on his endurance. This was no longer just about saving a wild animal. It had become a testament to the depths of compassion and the strength of the human spirit. The forest grew denser, presenting new challenges. Thorny bushes tore at Mark's clothes, and low-hanging branches forced him to crouch awkwardly while maintaining his precious cargo. Each obstacle drained more of his energy, yet somehow he found the strength to continue. His world narrowed to the simple rhythm of placing one foot in front of the other. Through it all, the cub remained a steadfast companion. Its occasional soft whimpers were not just sounds of pain now, but seemed to carry encouragement. When Mark's steps faltered, the bear would shift its weight slightly, helping him regain balance. Their survival had become intertwined, each depending on the other in this race against time. As the afternoon approached, Mark's physical reserves neared their end. Yet his determination grew stronger. The trust of this wild creature, its life in his hands, awakened something primal within him. Each step forward became an act of defiance against exhaustion. Each mile a triumph of will over physical limitations. The afternoon sky turned an ominous dark gray as the first heavy raindrops began to fall. Mark felt the cub shiver against his back, its body temperature dropping in the cold rain. The bandage on its leg had completely soaked through, and the bear's breathing became increasingly labored. Their situation was growing dire with each passing minute. The rain quickly transformed the forest floor into a treacherous surface. Fallen leaves became slick underneath Mark's boots, and the soil turned to mud that sucked at his feet with every step. His legs, already pushed beyond their limits, began to shake uncontrollably. Each step required intense concentration to avoid falling. Mark's vision started to blur from exhaustion. Hours of carrying the injured cub had drained every ounce of his strength. His shoulders burned with an intensity he had never experienced, and his back muscles spasmed painfully. The weight that had seemed manageable at the start now felt impossible to bear. The cub's condition deteriorated rapidly in the cold rain. Its soft whimpers grew weaker, and its body trembled continuously. Mark could feel the bear's heartbeat becoming irregular against his back. The trust they had built over their journey made these signs of decline even more heartbreaking. He spoke gentle words of encouragement, though his voice cracked with emotion and fatigue. Lightning flashed across the sky, followed by deafening thunder. The storm's intensity increased, turning the forest into a maze of wind-whipped branches and staining rain. Mark searched desperately for shelter, knowing they needed to protect the cub's wounds from the downpour. A fallen tree created a small natural shelter, and he carefully maneuvered them underneath. During this brief respite, Mark checked the cub's injuries. The sight made his heart sink. The wound had begun showing signs of infection, and the bear's eyes had grown dull with fever. Time was running out. They couldn't afford to wait out the storm. Without immediate medical attention, all their efforts would be in vain. In this moment of near despair, Mark found strength he didn't know he possessed. The thought of failing now, after coming so far, ignited a fierce determination within him. He removed his last dry layer of clothing and wrapped it around the shivering cub. His own comfort no longer mattered. Only their shared survival counted. Through the curtain of rain, Mark spotted something that made his heart leap. A break in the tree line suggested they were nearing the forest edge. Civilization lay somewhere beyond those trees. The veterinary clinic couldn't be far now. This glimpse of hope renewed his energy, pushing back the wall of exhaustion that threatened to overcome him. The final stretch proved to be the most challenging. The storm reached its peak intensity, transforming small streams into rushing waters that blocked their path. Mark waded through knee-deep currents, every step a battle against the force of water and mud. The cub pressed closer against him, seeking warmth and security in these frightening moments. Their shared ordeal had created a bond that transcended the natural order. When Mark stumbled, the cub would shift its weight instinctively to help him regain balance. When the bear's trembling increased, Mark found himself humming softly, a gesture that seemed to calm them both. They were no longer simply human and wild animal, but partners in survival. As they finally broke through the forest edge, the lights of Hamilton appeared in the distance through the rain. The sight nearly brought Mark to his knees with relief. They had made it through the wilderness. Help was within reach. The cub stirred slightly, as if sensing the change in their circumstances. Its heartbeat, though weak, remained steady against Mark's back. Mark's legs nearly gave out as he staggered through the veterinary clinic's doors. The sudden brightness of fluorescent lights and warmth of the building created a stark contrast to their ordeal in the wilderness. Staff members rushed forward, their expressions a mixture of shock and concern at the sight of a man carrying an injured bear cub. The head veterinarian, Dr. Sarah Miller, took control of the situation immediately. Her experienced hands gently lifted the cub from Mark's makeshift sling onto an examination table. The bear, too weak to resist, lay still as the medical team quickly assessed its condition. Their faces grew serious as they discovered the extent of the injuries. The initial examination revealed severe trauma to the hind leg, dangerous levels of dehydration, and a rising fever from infection. Dr. Miller worked swiftly, inserting an IV line to deliver urgent fluids and antibiotics. The cub's eyes, now glazed with fever, found Mark's face across the room. Even in its weakened state, the bear seemed to seek reassurance from the human who had carried it to safety. Time became a blur of medical procedures and tense moments. The veterinary team cleaned and properly dressed the wounds, administered medication, and monitored the cub's vital signs. Each minute brought new challenges as they fought to stabilize their unusual patient. The infection had spread further than initially thought, threatening the cub's survival despite their best efforts. Mark watched from the corner of the treatment room, his own exhaustion forgotten in the anxiety of these critical moments. His clothes dripped rainwater onto the floor, and his muscles screamed in protest when he moved, but none of that mattered. The only important thing was the small life fighting for survival under the bright medical lights. Dr. Miller approached Mark with a measured expression. The next 24 hours would be crucial, she explained. The cub had lost a lot of blood, and the infection was severe. However, the bear's youth and the remarkably swift transport to medical care provided hope. Sometimes, she added softly, the will to live shown by wild animals could surprise even the most experienced veterinarians. Days turned into weeks as the bear cub made a remarkable recovery. The infection cleared, and its wounds began to heal under the expert care of the veterinary staff. The young bear's strength returned gradually, bringing back the sparkle in its eyes that Mark remembered from their journey through the forest. Mark visited the clinic every day during the rehabilitation process. The cub recognized his presence instantly, responding with soft churring sounds that made the veterinary staff exchange amazed glances. Their connection, forged during those desperate hours in the wilderness, had not faded. Instead, it grew stronger as the bear recovered. Unexpected behaviors emerged during the rehabilitation. The cub showed unusual comfort around humans, particularly Mark, while maintaining its wild instincts. Dr. Miller noted that such a balance was rare and precisely what they hoped for in rehabilitation cases. The bear remained wild at heart but carried a unique understanding of human kindness. As autumn turned to early winter, the time for release approached. The cub had grown stronger and more independent, ready to return to its natural habitat. Wildlife authorities identified a protected area with a healthy black bear population, far from human settlements but rich in natural food sources. On the morning of release, Mark stood with the wildlife team at the chosen site. The cub, now fully healed and significantly larger, took its first steps into freedom. At the edge of the forest, it paused and turned back one final time. In that moment, Mark saw the same trust in its eyes that had carried them through their incredible journey. Then, with confident steps, the young bear disappeared into the wilderness, carrying with it a remarkable story of survival and the unbreakable bond between human and wild animal. Subscribe to Nature's Incredible Stories for more amazing tales of wildlife rescue and survival. Join our community of nature enthusiasts and be the first to receive heartwarming stories of hope, compassion, and the extraordinary connections between humans and wildlife. Like, share, and follow us to support animal rescue efforts worldwide.